No one ever warned me that sobriety wasn't just about removing something from my life. It was about removing the very thing I used to hide behind. I thought quitting would feel like stepping out of a storm and finally reaching solid land. But sobriety wasn't a shore. It was an ocean even deeper, darker, and more honest than anything I had faced before. The first thing it brought wasn't peace. It was silence. A silence so sharp it cut through me. With the fog gone, I could suddenly see everything with painful clarity: my habits, my excuses, my fears, the people I had pushed away, the versions of myself I pretended never existed. It felt like waking up inside a house I had run away from years ago, only to find every room filled with my own unfinished stories. Sobriety didn't give me back who I was before. That person didn't exist anymore. Instead, it forced me to confront the stranger I had become while I wasn't paying attention. I realized that escaping had become a full-time job, and I had been hiring every distraction I could to do the work I refused to face. But the most unexpected part wasn't the withdrawal or the cravings. It was the clarity, and clarity is heavy. It sits on your chest. It whispers truths you don't want to hear. It hands you memories you thought were buried in places too deep to reach. People told me sobriety would bring freedom. They just forgot to mention that freedom comes with a price. You must carry your own life in your hands with no buffer, no shield, no numbing curtain to soften the blow. You feel everything, too much, too soon, too raw. And feeling again is terrifying. Yet beneath the chaos, beneath the trembling honesty of those first days, something else began to stir, something fragile, but alive. A kind of inner voice I had silenced for years. A voice that said, "You're still here. And maybe that still counts for something." This is the story of how I walked through the rubble of who I was, how I learned to sit with my own shadows, and how I discovered that sobriety doesn't just strip you down, it rebuilds you. But only after it breaks you open. What no one told me is that sobriety brings truth, and truth, when it finally arrives, changes everything. My first night sober wasn't a triumph. It wasn't peaceful, empowering, or even meaningful. It felt like being dropped inside my own mind with all the lights turned off. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the floor as if it could tell me who I was now that my familiar escape route was gone. I kept waiting for some dramatic realization, some burst of clarity that would sweep over me and make everything feel purposeful. But all I felt was emptiness, an ache, a hollow space where the noise used to be. It was strange noticing how loud the world became when I stopped drowning it out. I heard the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the sound of my own heartbeat reminding me that I was alive whether I wanted to be or not. There was no fog softening the edges of my thoughts. No numbing comfort. Just me, unfiltered, sitting in a room that suddenly felt too small for the weight I was carrying. I paced the hallway, then returned to the bed, then stood by the window like someone waiting for a message that would never come. My mind kept replaying moments I didn't ask to revisit, arguments, regrets, decisions that used to feel distant behind the haze. Now they were sharp, vivid, impossible to ignore. I tried to breathe through it, but every breath felt too heavy, too deliberate. Around 3:48 a.m., something inside me cracked open, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but quietly, like a floorboard loosening under pressure. I realized that sobriety didn't begin with strength. It began with vulnerability so intense it felt like standing barefoot on broken glass. I wasn't triumphant. I was terrified. But I was present. And that presence, fragile as it was, felt like the first real thing I'd experienced in years. That night didn't mark the end of anything. It marked the beginning. The moment I stopped running long enough to finally meet myself. The second day hit harder than the first, not because of physical cravings, but because everything was unbearably clear. The world felt louder, brighter, sharper, almost aggressive in its intensity. I woke up with a strange heaviness, like I had misplaced a part of myself overnight. My hands trembled slightly as I made coffee, not from withdrawal, but from the unfamiliar emptiness of a morning without the routine that had shaped my nights for years. I kept noticing things I had ignored for so long: the uneven paint on the walls, the dimness of the living room light, the dust gathering on shelves I never looked at closely. Everything seemed to be asking me the same question: now what? And I had no answer. I wasn't used to being awake without something numbing the edges of my thoughts. My emotions felt wild, untrained, like animals that had been locked up too long and were finally breaking free. I felt irritation for no reason. Sadness that came out of nowhere. Fear that sat quietly in the corner of my mind, watching me. But beneath all of that was a strange, unexpected awareness. I could identify every feeling as it rose, like waves. I wasn't drowning in them. They were overwhelming, yes, but they were also recognizable. Nameable. And maybe that was the first sign that I hadn't been lost beyond repair. Late in the afternoon, I went outside just to breathe different air. The colors of the world seemed more defined than I remembered: the green of the trees, the blue of the sky, even the cracks in the sidewalk. It was as if someone had adjusted the contrast on my entire life. For a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: possibility. Not hope, not yet. But possibility. Sobriety still felt foreign, uncomfortable, almost hostile. But it also felt like a door I had finally opened, even if I didn't know what waited on the other side. On the third day, the silence of my home became a mirror I couldn't escape. Without noise, without distraction, without the familiar haze to blur the edges, I was forced to sit with myself in a way I had avoided for years. I sat on the floor of my living room, staring at nothing in particular, and suddenly memories began to surface, quietly at first, then all at once, like a flood breaking through a fragile dam. I remembered conversations I had forgotten, mistakes I pretended never happened, versions of myself I had buried under layers of avoidance. I saw the younger me, the scared me, the angry me, the tired me, all the selves I had abandoned because they were too painful to look at. Sobriety didn't ask permission to bring them back. It simply placed them in front of me, one by one, as if saying, "You can't move forward until you face them." I didn't feel ready. I didn't feel strong enough. But the thing about sobriety is that it doesn't wait for readiness. It exposes you in real time. Every emotion felt amplified, raw, unfamiliar. I realized how much of my life had been lived on autopilot, numbed by habit rather than guided by intention. And in that uncomfortable stillness, something unexpected happened. I didn't fall apart. I breathed. And the world didn't end. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, really, but to me, it felt monumental. Because for the first time, I wasn't running. I was staying. I was witnessing myself without turning away, without hiding, without reaching for the escape hatch I had relied on for so long. Maybe sobriety wasn't taking something from me after all. Maybe it was giving something back. A relationship with myself that I had long abandoned. A relationship that would take time, patience, and courage to rebuild. And on day 3, for the first time, I felt a flicker of that courage. By the 4th day, I began to understand that sobriety didn't just remove the substance, it removed the shelter I had been living under. Without it, I felt exposed to every shift in the world around me. Sounds were louder, emotions heavier, memories sharper. Even the light through the blinds felt different, almost intrusive, as if the sun itself was insisting I wake up in ways I wasn't ready for. I noticed how much time I used to spend avoiding the present. I used to fill my evenings with noise, screens, distractions, anything to keep myself from thinking too deeply. But now, the present was unavoidable. I felt every minute passing in my body, the pulse in my hands, the tightness in my chest, the strange mix of restlessness and exhaustion that made it hard to sit still but impossible to do anything productive. That afternoon, I found myself cleaning compulsively. Not because I suddenly cared about the mess, but because moving my hands kept my mind from spiraling. I scrubbed countertops that didn't need scrubbing, rearranged books I hadn't opened in years, wiped dust from places no one would ever look. And somewhere between organizing old receipts and tossing out empty boxes, I came across a picture of myself from years ago. I stared at it for a long time. That version of me looked carefree, confident, light. But the more I studied the photo, the more I realized how much of it was a performance. I recognized the tiredness behind the smile, the tension in the jaw, the slight dullness in the eyes. I remembered that day clearly, the laughter, the jokes, the casual drinks. I remembered pretending everything was fine. But now I could see it. The act. The hiding. And something inside me softened. I didn't feel shame. I felt grief. Grief for the person I used to be. For the one who carried so much alone because asking for help felt like admitting defeat. That night, for the first time since starting this journey, I whispered to myself, I'm trying. It wasn't a declaration of strength. It wasn't a promise. But it was real. And right now, real was enough. On the 5th day, the cravings hit me differently. Not physically, but emotionally, like ghost echoes of a life I had left behind. It wasn't the substance I missed, it was the ritual, the familiarity, the false sense of comfort that came with it. I realized how deeply intertwined my habits had become with my identity. Without them, I felt like I was walking through my life as a visitor instead of a resident. My mind kept returning to old routines. The way I used to unwind after work. The nights I convinced myself I deserved just a little. The excuses that came so naturally I started believing them. I felt my thoughts pulling me backward, tempting me with the warmth of habits that once felt like safety. But beneath that temptation was a darker truth, those habits had never kept me safe. They had kept me silent. The day stretched endlessly, each hour a test of patience and endurance. I tried reading, but the words blurred together. I tried music, but everything felt too emotional. I tried sitting in the quiet, but the quiet had teeth. Eventually, I grabbed my jacket and went for a long walk, hoping movement would calm the restless storm inside me. As I walked, I noticed people going about their lives, laughing, carrying groceries, talking on their phones. They seemed so effortlessly present, so unaware of the battlefield inside my chest. For a moment, I envied them. But then another thought surfaced, maybe they were fighting their own battles too. Maybe everyone carried something unseen. Halfway through my walk, I stopped by a park bench and sat down. The air was crisp, and the wind brushed against my face like a reminder that the world was still moving, even if I felt stuck. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe deeply. Slowly. Deliberately. And something shifted, just slightly, just enough. I realized that the craving wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of healing. My body was adjusting. My mind was learning. I was grieving the loss of an identity I no longer wanted. And grief, I reminded myself, is part of growth. The 6th day was the day I confronted the loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being physically alone, but the kind that appears when you strip away the distractions you depended on. It was a loneliness that felt ancient, like it had been waiting beneath the surface for me to finally stop running. I woke up feeling hollow, as if someone had scooped out the center of me. The house felt too quiet, my phone too still, the world too distant. I checked messages I didn't need to check, scrolled through old photos, wandered from room to room trying to find something that felt grounding. Nothing did. It occurred to me then how much I used to fill this emptiness with noise, social noise, emotional noise, chemical noise. Anything to avoid facing the hollow space inside. Now, sober, that hollow space had nowhere to hide. It was sitting right in front of me, staring patiently, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I couldn't escape it, so I sat with it. I sat on the couch, knees pulled close, arms wrapped around myself like I was trying to hold together whatever pieces remained. And I let the emptiness speak. It told me things I didn't want to hear, how long I had ignored my own needs, how often I had chosen numbness over truth, how rarely I had allowed myself to be vulnerable with anyone, including myself. I started to cry before I even realized it was happening. Not loud, not dramatically, just slow, steady tears that felt like they had been stored inside me for years. And instead of pushing them away, I let them fall. After a while, the loneliness softened. It didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It became less like a void and more like a room I hadn't visited in a long time, a room filled with memories, fears, and fragments of things I once cared about. I realized I wasn't empty. I was clearing space. Sobriety wasn't stealing my comfort. It was inviting me to rebuild it. Slowly, honestly, from the inside out. On the 7th day, something unexpected happened. I felt a moment of peace. It didn't last long, and it wasn't intense, but it was real. It came in the morning while I was making tea, the sunlight slipping through the window at just the right angle to warm the side of my face. For a few seconds, I wasn't thinking about the past, the cravings, the emptiness, or the fear. I was simply there, breathing, existing, and it didn't hurt. It surprised me so much that I almost didn't trust it. My mind immediately tried to question it, analyze it, ruin it. But the moment remained, fragile and fleeting, like a small bird landing on my hand. And for the first time since choosing sobriety, I felt the possibility of something other than struggle. The rest of the day wasn't easy. The peace faded quickly, replaced by the familiar waves of restlessness and doubt. But now I had a small proof, an anchor, that the pain wasn't permanent. That maybe, just maybe, something good could grow from this chaos. I spent the afternoon journaling, something I hadn't done in years. The words came out messy and uneven, but they were honest. I wrote about my fears, my regrets, the people I missed, the parts of myself I didn't recognize anymore. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the page blurred from tears I didn't bother wiping away. When I finally closed the notebook, I felt lighter, not fixed, not healed, but lighter. Writing had opened a door inside me where I could place the things I had been carrying alone. It made me realize how long I had been holding my emotions hostage, demanding they stay quiet. That evening, I stood by the window and watched the sky change colors. I knew the next days would still be hard. I knew nothing magical had happened. But I also knew something had shifted, subtly, quietly, in my favor. Sobriety hadn't given me peace. But it had given me a glimpse of it. And sometimes, a glimpse is enough to keep moving. By the 8th day, I began to realize how much of my life had been lived on repeat. Without the haze, every routine I used to rush through now revealed its hidden weight. Mornings weren't automatic anymore, they were deliberate. Even brushing my teeth felt like a small ceremony, a reminder that I was choosing to care for myself in ways I had neglected for too long. But with this awareness came a strange sense of disorientation, as if I were walking through a world that looked familiar but behaved differently. I spent most of the morning pacing, feeling energy bubbling under my skin with nowhere to go. Sobriety made me restless, like my body was searching for something it couldn't name. I tried to distract myself, read a book, watch a show, clean, but nothing held my attention. Every few minutes, my mind wandered to old habits, old escapes, old versions of me. Memories arrived uninvited, replaying scenes I thought I had long outgrown. Around midday, I forced myself to go outside. The air felt crisp, almost too clean, and I breathed it in like medicine. As I walked through my neighborhood, I noticed how many details I had ignored before: the fading paint on the corner store, the cracks in the pavement, the way people's faces softened when they talked to each other. I wondered how many years I had spent only half seeing the world, half hearing conversations, half living experiences. Suddenly, a wave of sadness washed over me, grief not for what I used to do, but for all the moments I had missed. Birthdays, conversations, sunsets, emotions, all blurred into the background of a life I had been too numb to appreciate. I stopped on the sidewalk and closed my eyes, letting the sadness settle. It didn't crush me. It didn't drown me. It just existed. And for the first time, I understood something important: sobriety wasn't just about letting go. It was also about returning to the world, to the present, to the parts of myself that had been waiting quietly for me to come back. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it eased it, like someone gently loosening a knot inside my chest. By evening, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The day had tested me, pushed me, exposed me. But it had also given me something precious: awareness. Awareness of the world, of myself, of the life I still had the chance to live, even if I had forgotten how. The 9th day brought a new challenge: facing people. Until then, I had been cocooned in my own private battle, sheltered by the walls of my home. But life doesn't pause just because you're trying to rebuild yourself. Messages were piling up, invitations ignored, responsibilities postponed. Eventually, I had to step back into the world, even though I felt nowhere near ready. I met a friend for coffee, a friend I trusted, but not enough to let them see everything happening inside me. As soon as I sat down across from them, I felt exposed, like they could see the cracks in my armor, the trembling underneath my calm expression. They asked me how I was doing, and I froze. The truth felt too heavy to say out loud, yet lying felt impossible. "I'm trying," I finally whispered. It was the only honest sentence I could manage. They nodded gently, not pushing, not prying, simply holding space for me. And that small act of kindness overwhelmed me more than any interrogation could have. I realized how long I had gone without genuine connection, how long I had hidden behind jokes, excuses, blurry nights, and half-truths. As we talked, I noticed how differently conversation felt now. Every word mattered. Every pause carried meaning. I wasn't floating above the moment or drifting away from it. I was in it, fully, uncomfortably, beautifully present. And being present with someone else felt vulnerable in a way I hadn't expected. After coffee, I walked home with a strange combination of relief and heaviness. Socializing sober was like learning a new language, one where I had to translate my feelings into words instead of drowning them. I realized how much I had relied on substances to soften my insecurities, to mask my discomfort, to hide my fear of not being enough. But that evening, as I sat alone in my living room, I began to understand that sobriety wasn't taking away my ability to connect, it was giving me the chance to connect authentically. Without filters. Without performance. Without noise. It felt terrifying. It felt freeing. And it felt like the beginning of something real. Day 10 arrived with a heaviness I couldn't explain. I woke up tired, emotionally drained, as if the past days had caught up with me all at once. Sobriety wasn't linear, I had heard people say that, but I didn't understand it until now. I thought progress would feel like climbing, like rising higher each day. But instead, it felt like walking through shifting sand, some steps steady, others sinking without warning. All day, my mind replayed a reel of memories I didn't ask for. Embarrassing moments. Harsh words. Nights I couldn't fully remember. Faces of people I had hurt or disappointed. It felt like standing in front of an avalanche of regrets, and I wasn't sure how much of it I could handle. I tried breathing exercises, journaling, going for a walk, but nothing could quiet the noise inside me. By the afternoon, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My face looked tired, older somehow. Not physically, emotionally. I saw the weight of the years I had spent avoiding myself. And in the reflection, I noticed something else: fear. Not the fear of relapse, but the fear of growth. Because growth meant responsibility. Growth meant letting go of who I used to be, even if that version of me had been familiar, comfortable, predictable. I touched my own reflection, fingers resting lightly against the glass, and whispered, "I'm still here." It wasn't reassurance, it was a reminder. A survival note to myself. I might not feel strong, but I was still standing. Later that evening, I sat on the floor with a blanket wrapped around me, letting the emotions wash over me without resisting. I let myself grieve every mistake, every lost moment, every opportunity one had let slip through my fingers. And as painful as it was, I felt something loosening inside my chest, like a confession I had been holding for too long. Day 10 taught me something crucial. Sobriety wasn't about erasing the past. It was about facing it. Piece by painful piece. Until it no longer controlled me. On the 11th day, clarity settled over me like a fog lifting after a long storm. It wasn't a dramatic revelation, more like the slow realization that I had been holding my breath and finally remembered how to breathe. I felt a strange calmness, fragile but present, as if the chaos inside me had momentarily paused to let me catch up. That morning, I went for a walk before the world fully woke. The sky was still dim, the air cool, the streets quiet. Everything felt suspended in that early hour, and I felt suspended with it. As I walked, I could feel my thoughts slowing down, aligning themselves instead of colliding. It was the first time I didn't feel overwhelmed by my own mind. Halfway through the walk, I sat on a curb and watched the sky shift from gray to gold. The beauty of it hit me harder than I expected. Not because sunrises are rare, but because noticing them had become rare. I felt a sudden ache in my chest, not sadness, but gratitude mixed with regret. I thought about all the mornings I had slept through, the beauty I had missed while numbing myself. And I thought about how many mornings I still had the chance to witness if I kept choosing this path. As the sun rose, something inside me rose with it, a small but unmistakable sense of hope. Not the glittery, movie-style hope that promises everything will be fine, but a quiet, determined kind of hope, the kind that whispers, maybe you can do this. Maybe you can build a life you actually want. By the time I walked home, I felt steadier. Not cured, not transformed, but steadier. Sobriety had not promised me peace, but on day 11, it gave me a glimpse of what peace could one day feel like. And even though I knew harder days were ahead, I also knew this journey wasn't just about surviving. It was about becoming. On the 12th day, I confronted a truth I had been tiptoeing around. Sobriety wasn't just changing my habits, it was changing my identity. I felt it in small ways, like how I paused before answering messages, or how I took deeper breaths when something irritated me instead of reacting instantly. I was becoming someone else, someone I didn't fully recognize yet. And that terrified me as much as it intrigued me. That morning, I woke with a strange heaviness in my chest, the kind that doesn't come from sadness but from awareness. I realized how many parts of my personality had been shaped by avoidance, my humor, my detachment, my excuses, even my easygoing attitude. Without the haze, I could see the architecture of who I had been, and it wasn't as solid as I once believed. I spent the morning sitting at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold, thinking about the person I wanted to become. Not the idealized version I had always imagined, the one who magically had everything under control. But a real version, someone who faced life with honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. Someone who didn't hide from their own emotions. Someone who didn't need a crutch to feel like themselves. But transformation isn't romantic. It's messy. It's unpredictable. It feels like building a new home inside yourself while the old one is still collapsing. And some moments during the day felt unbearably fragile. A simple song on the radio made my eyes water. A memory from years ago surfaced at the wrong time. The weight of regret pressed against my ribs, insisting I revisit things I still wasn't ready to face. In the afternoon, I tried something new. I wrote a letter to my old self. Not to shame them, not to blame them, but to acknowledge them. I wrote about pain they never understood how to carry, about the loneliness they tried to bury, about the small victories they never celebrated. And as I wrote, something inside me dropped, like a weight I'd been unknowingly holding. By evening, I sat on my couch with a quiet sense of acceptance. Not peace yet, but acceptance. I wasn't who I used to be. I wasn't who I wanted to become. I was somewhere in between, in the uncomfortable middle of change. And for the first time, that felt enough. The 13th day taught me that healing isn't just internal, it's relational. I realized this when I received a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Someone I had drifted away from without meaning to. Someone who had tried to be there for me long before I was ready to let anyone in. The message was simple: thinking of you. Hope you're okay. It hit harder than I expected. I stared at the notification for minutes, unsure how to respond. The old me would have replied with a joke or a vague, emotionless sentence. But now, that felt dishonest. This journey was stripping away my masks, and I wasn't sure how to communicate without them yet. Eventually, I typed, "I'm working on things. It's been tough, but I'm trying." It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't poetic. But it was true. And truth felt like a small revolution. The rest of the day, I thought about the relationships I had neglected. Not intentionally, but inevitably. Sobriety was showing me how many connections I had numbed myself out of, moments when I should have listened, moments when I should have apologized, moments when I should have asked for help but didn't. Guilt washed over me in waves, but with it came clarity. I couldn't rebuild everything at once. Recovery wasn't about immediately repairing every broken bridge. It was about showing up differently, slowly, consistently. Later in the afternoon, I called a family member I hadn't spoken to in a while. The conversation was short, awkward even, but hearing their voice grounded me. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, even if I felt like it most days. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized sobriety was giving me an opportunity one thought I had lost, the chance to reconnect, not as the person I pretended to be, but as who I truly was beneath all the layers. Relationships take time. Trust takes time. But honesty starts now. On the 14th day, I encountered one of the most dangerous feelings in early sobriety: confidence. Not the healthy kind, but the seductive kind, the one that whispers, "You're fine now. You're in control. You don't need to be this strict anymore." It creeps in quietly, disguised as progress, disguised as strength. I woke up feeling lighter than usual. My thoughts were clearer, my mood steadier. I got ready without dragging my feet, made breakfast, and even played some music. For a moment, everything felt normal, like I had finally crossed some invisible threshold. And that's when the dangerous thoughts began. You're doing great. You're not like you were before. You've proved your point. One slip wouldn't ruin anything. You're stronger now. You could handle it. They sounded reasonable. They sounded harmless. But I knew the truth beneath them. These weren't thoughts of confidence, they were echoes of the part of me that wanted comfort over growth. I spent the morning uneasy, aware of the internal tug-of-war. Part of me wanted to believe I was fixed, that the hardest part was behind me. But another part, the part that had survived these 14 days, knew that the moment I felt safest was the moment I was most vulnerable. Around noon, I sat at my kitchen table and forced myself to face the truth: I wasn't healed. I wasn't beyond danger. I was still in the beginning. Confidence without stability was just another disguise for denial. So I did something uncomfortable. I reached out for support. I messaged someone who understood recovery and told them what I was feeling. They didn't lecture me. They didn't panic. They simply said, "It's normal. Confidence is tricky. Stay aware. Stay honest." Their words grounded me more than they knew. By the end of the day, the false confidence had faded, replaced by humility, not the humiliating kind, but the kind that keeps you anchored. The kind that reminds you that progress and risk can coexist. Sobriety wasn't a victory lap. It was a daily choice. And that day, I chose it again. Day 15 felt like stepping into a clearing after wandering through dense forest for weeks. My mind felt quieter, my emotions more balanced, as if I had finally given myself permission to breathe. But beneath that calmness was an unexpected emptiness, an awareness that, with the chaos settling, I now had space I didn't know how to fill. I realized how much of my life had been shaped around managing crises, emotional, social, internal. Without the constant noise, I felt strangely directionless. I wasn't used to stability, and part of me didn't trust it. Peace felt like a foreign rhythm, one my body didn't know how to move to yet. I tried to fill the day with purpose. I cleaned, organized, cooked, read. But everything felt slightly off, like I was pretending to be a functional person rather than actually being one. I wondered if other people in recovery felt this way, this uncomfortable stillness that shows up when the storms finally pause. In the afternoon, I sat outside on my porch with a notebook in my lap, staring at a blank page. I wanted to write something meaningful, something that captured where I was in this journey, but nothing came. Instead, I wrote a single sentence. What do I do with a life I'm finally here for? The question lingered, echoing in my mind long after I closed the notebook. Sobriety wasn't just giving me a new beginning, it was giving me responsibility for that beginning. And responsibility felt both empowering and terrifying. But as the evening arrived, something subtle shifted. I realized the emptiness I felt wasn't a void, it was potential. Space for new habits, new connections, new parts of myself I hadn't met yet. The silence wasn't punishment. It was room to grow. That night, I whispered to myself, softly, almost shyly. "I'm proud of you." It felt strange to say. Stranger still to believe. But I did believe it, just a little. And that was enough to carry me into day 16 with a steadier heart. Day 16 unfolded with a heaviness that didn't come from exhaustion, but from clarity. Sobriety had sharpened the edges of my awareness, and now I noticed things I had ignored for years, the way my shoulders tensed when I felt uncertain, the way my mind searched for distractions when emotions rose too quickly, the way silence exposed everything I used to drown out. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The light outside was still dim, and for a moment I lay there, listening to the quiet hum of the world waking up. My thoughts were soft at first, then gradually grew louder, like an orchestra tuning itself before the performance. I thought about my patterns, my impulses, my fear of stillness. I thought about how often I had confused comfort with safety, escape with relief. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the street below. People moved with purpose, walking dogs, rushing to work, starting their routines without hesitation. I envied their certainty. My life felt like it was being rewritten every day, each new realization erasing an old understanding of myself. Around midday, I went for a walk. The air was cool and crisp, and each breath felt like it was cleaning out some forgotten corner inside me. As I walked, memories began surfacing, moments I had brushed aside, conversations I barely remembered, decisions I made under the influence of fear disguised as confidence. Sobriety was pulling the threads of my past apart, not to unravel me, but to help me understand who I had been and why. the most painful memory hit me unexpectedly, a moment when someone had asked if I was okay, and I had laughed it off, making a joke instead of admitting how lost I felt. That memory lingered like a bruise. I realized how many opportunities I'd had to ask for help. How many times I chose silence instead. By evening, I felt emotionally drained but grounded. I realized, maybe for the first time, that sobriety wasn't just about removing something, it was about adding space for truth. And truth, even when it aches, is a kind of freedom I was only beginning to understand. That night, before going to bed, I whispered to myself, "Keep going." And for the first time, it didn't feel like a demand. It felt like a promise. On the 17th day, I learned that healing comes in layers, slow, stubborn layers that reveal themselves only when you're ready to face them. And apparently, I was ready for a layer I didn't know existed. The day began normally enough. I handled my tasks, made breakfast, cleaned a bit. But beneath the routine, I felt a subtle tension building, like a storm gathering at the edge of my thoughts. I couldn't name it, but I could feel it. A pressure. A restlessness. A tug towards something I couldn't yet see clearly. It wasn't until the afternoon that it cracked open. I found an old photo while searching for something else. A picture of me before everything spiraled, before the habits, before the hiding. A version of me I barely remembered, smiling, unaware, untouched by the storms that would follow. I stared at the picture for a long time. At first, I felt nostalgic. Then sad. Then something sharper, grief. I realized I wasn't just grieving the people I had lost or the opportunities one had missed. I was grieving myself. The version of me who never had the chance to grow without the weight of coping mechanisms I didn't understand at the time. The version of me who wanted so badly to be strong but didn't know how. The version of me who didn't deserve the pain they carried alone. The grief hit me unexpectedly hard. My eyes burned, my throat tightened, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself cry, not quietly, not controlled, but fully, honestly, with no mask and no apology. It felt like something inside me was breaking open, but not in a destructive way. More like removing a cracked shell I had outgrown. After the tears settled, I felt raw but lighter. I whispered to that younger version of myself, "I'm sorry you went through that." Then, with a trembling breath, "I'm going to take care of us now." The rest of the day passed gently. My emotions didn't overwhelm me, they guided me. I realized sobriety wasn't just transforming me, it was allowing me to meet myself, truly meet myself, for the first time. And that meeting, however painful, felt like the beginning of forgiveness. The 18th day arrived quietly, almost deceptively calm, as if the universe were pausing to let me catch up with the emotional storm of the day before. I woke with swollen eyes and a tenderness in my chest, the kind that lingers after a deep release, painful, but somehow cleansing. I felt hollowed out, but not empty. More like something old had been scooped away, making room for something new I didn't yet understand. I moved slowly that morning, careful with myself, as if rushing might shatter the fragile equilibrium I had found. Every action, brushing my teeth, making breakfast, folding clothes, carried a strange softness. I wasn't performing tasks, I was tending to myself. And for the first time, it didn't feel like an obligation. It felt like care. Midway through the day, I felt an urge to be outside. I grabbed my jacket and walked without a destination, letting my body guide me. The world felt different. Or maybe I did. The colors seemed sharper, the air cooler against my skin. Even the chatter of strangers passing by sounded more vivid, more alive. It struck me that sobriety wasn't just giving me clarity, it was giving me my senses back. I eventually found myself sitting on a bench overlooking a small pond. Birds skimmed the water, their wings barely touching the surface, leaving delicate ripples behind. I watched them, mesmerized by the simple elegance of the moment. And then a thought surfaced, quiet, but undeniable. I'm learning how to live. Not survive. Not numb. Not outrun. Live. The thought terrified me. Because living required responsibility, presence, openness. All the things I had avoided for years. But it also filled me with a strange, shimmering hope. Maybe I didn't need to have everything figured out to begin. Maybe beginning was enough. Sitting by the water, I whispered a small promise to myself. I won't abandon you anymore. It felt strange to say, stranger still to mean. But I did mean it. And that made all the difference. On the 19th day, I felt a shift, subtle but undeniable. As if something inside me had clicked into place. Not completion, not certainty, but alignment. A quiet understanding that I was moving in the right direction, even if the path was still uneven beneath my feet. The morning began with an unexpected burst of energy. I cleaned my space with intention, not out of restlessness or avoidance, but because I wanted my environment to reflect the internal changes I was fighting so hard to make. I opened the windows and let fresh air sweep through the rooms. It felt symbolic, a renewal of the physical space mirroring the internal one. Later, while sorting through a drawer, I found old notes I had written during some of my darker moments. Words filled with confusion, fear, and desperation. Reading them felt like looking into a mirror warped by suffering. I barely recognized the voice on the page. But instead of shame, I felt compassion. For that version of me. For the pain they carried. For the survival they managed, even when everything felt hopeless. I folded the notes carefully and placed them in a small box, not to revisit constantly, but to honor. They were part of my story, but not the whole story. Not anymore. In the afternoon, I went to a cafe, something I hadn't done alone in a long time. I ordered tea and sat by the window, watching people move through their day with an ease that once felt impossible for me. But as I sipped the warm drink, I realized I felt present. Actually present. My mind wasn't drifting, my emotions weren't spiraling, and I didn't feel the urge to escape. It was such a small moment, but it felt monumental. Sobriety wasn't just changing my life, it was changing my perception of it. That evening, I journaled about the future, not the idealized version I used to fantasize about, but a realistic one, rooted in effort and growth. For the first time, thinking about the future didn't overwhelm me. It inspired me. Before bed, I stood in front of the mirror, not to criticize, not to analyze, but simply to acknowledge myself. And the reflection looking back didn't seem like a stranger. It looked like someone becoming whole. The 20th day arrived with an unexpected sense of gravity. I felt the weight of the journey behind me, not heavy, but significant. 20 days may not seem like much to the outside world, but for me, it was a lifetime. A reconstruction. A rebirth. I spent the morning in quiet reflection. I brewed my coffee, sat in my usual spot by the window, and let my mind wander through the days I had survived. The fear, the clarity, the grief, the breakthroughs. Every moment, every emotion, every step had shaped me into someone I was just beginning to understand. But by midday, an unsettling thought crept in. What now? 20 days had been a milestone I never thought I'd reach. But milestones can be intimidating, they imply continuation. They demand forward movement. And part of me still doubted whether I was capable of carrying this progress into the unknown. I paced around my living room, restless. The quiet that once felt comforting now felt charged with possibility and uncertainty. Sobriety had stripped me down, rebuilt me, tested me, revealed me, and now it was asking me to choose how I wanted to live beyond this chapter. So I did the only thing that made sense. I stepped outside. I walked to a nearby hill that overlooked the city. The climb was steeper than I remembered, but every step felt symbolic, effortful, intentional, earned. When I reached the top, the city stretched before me, alive and endless. I felt small, but not insignificant. Connected, somehow, to something larger than my fears. Up there, with the wind brushing against my skin and the skyline shimmering in the distance, I whispered 3 words that felt both terrifying and liberating. I choose life. Not survival. Not escape. Life. And for the first time, I believed myself. Here's the part no one told me about sobriety, the twist I didn't see coming. The moment you reclaim your life starts speaking back to you. That night, still feeling the echo of my declaration on the hill, I returned home and sat with the silence that had become my unexpected companion. But the silence felt different this time. Not empty. Not heavy. It felt expectant. I picked up my phone to set an alarm, and that's when I saw it. A message from a number I didn't recognize. Just one sentence. Are you ready to learn why you survived? My heart slammed against my ribs. I reread the message twice, 3 times. There was no name. No hint. No context. Just that question, sharp, unsettling, prophetic. Before I could overthink it, another bubble appeared. You've been chosen. And your story isn't just yours anymore. A chill cascaded down my spine, not from fear, but from something deeper. A sense that the last 20 days had been preparing me for something far greater than healing. A calling I had never expected. A purpose I had never imagined. The screen lit up again. This time, a location pin. No explanation. No instructions. Just coordinates. And as impossible as it sounds, something inside me knew this wasn't a mistake. This was the beginning of everything I was meant to face, the reason I had fought so hard to stay alive. Sobriety hadn't been my ending. It had been my initiation. And the real story, the one I was born to tell, was just beginning.